Welcome to the Baird English Symposium. As I've said in previous years, you're part of a long and unique school tradition that connects 35 years of students and teachers, readers and writers, from our first symposium author, E.L. Doctorow, to John Updike, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Jennifer Egan, and last year, Elizabeth Strout. Though many schools bring in writers to speak to students for an hour at an assembly, few schools have a program like yours, conceived by longtime English teacher Warren Baird in 1983 as a celebration of teaching and learning as well as reading and writing. You are, though you may not always believe it, incredibly lucky to have this opportunity. Nevertheless, you are not the only ones who benefit from this program. The authors who visit our campus, who listen to your questions and comments, who sense your enthusiasm and engagement, recreate what J.D. Salinger has called the beautiful reciprocal arrangement of reading, teaching, and learning. These authors appreciate your company and learn from you as well. But don't take my word for it. Flipping the page. In 2006, Tim O'Brien, author of, among other things, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Things They Carried, commented that nowhere in my travels, including stops at a good many college campuses, have students been so thoroughly prepared for a writer's visit. My conversations with students were not only lively, but of an extraordinarily high level. Now and then, in fact, I had the spooky suspicion that a number of students knew my work better than I did. In 2013, Tony Kushner claimed, "I have to say this has been the most astonishing couple of days. Really, I have to say more than anything else, I'm just absolutely astonished by the students. I learned a lot, and they were really generous and wonderful last night, and then great all day long. But this afternoon, I also got to meet sixth graders. I've seen sixth graders, but I've never actually talked to them. They were just like little tiny adults, sort of standing there in their ties and dresses, so self-possessed and incredibly smart." The poet Donald Hall was grateful to that our students were lively and intelligent, able to speak without the deference that turns a visitor into a monument. And as you all know, the late Gwendolyn Brooks, visiting author way back in 1993, was so impressed with our students and program that she endowed an annual poetry competition with prizes awarded annually to students in both the middle and upper schools. The Baird Symposium is the outgrowth of a school that has always nurtured and encouraged young writers. Even before Mr. Baird imagined the symposium in 1983, KO has produced more than its share of accomplished authors, including Brendan Gill, longtime editor of The New Yorker, Dominic and his brother John Gregory Dunn, as well as the playwright Elizabeth Egloff and local novelist and NPR host Colin McEnroe. Our graduates include several members like Peter Heller himself of the Iowa Writers Workshop, as well as many successful novelists, poets, and journalists, and others currently working at such publications as New York Magazine, People Magazine, and The New Yorker. I know that those who've graduated after 1983, the year of our first symposium, would mention the program as a formative experience. All of this makes me hope that one day, one of you, sitting in the audience, will return as our first ever symposium author to have graduated from KO. For now, though, it gives me great pleasure to invite Ellie Bavier, a member of this year's senior class, symposium class, to the stage to introduce Peter Heller.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellie Bavier, and I'm a part of the symposium class for 2018. So our symposium class basically followed the career of this year's symposium author, Peter Heller, and we have read all of his works, from magazine articles to his fiction novels. We even went on a class trip to Mr. Hill's New Hampshire camp to try and embrace Heller's lifestyle. Last night, we also had a dinner with Heller and his wife, Kim, where we talked about his life and his journey to becoming the writer that he is today. We had some good laughs, heard some interesting backstories, and we also found out that he was featured in the TV series Lost. Peter Heller got a degree from Dartmouth College, where he developed his love for writing and the outdoors. He's an expert kayaker, fly fisher, bush pilot, and is the author of many great books, from fiction to nonfiction. He received his MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is a longtime contributor to NPR, as well as Outside Magazine, Men's Journal, and National Geographic Adventure. He is an award-winning adventure writer, and he also won a fellowship for his poem, The Psalms of Malvine. In contrast to his various awards, Heller has also worked odd jobs like lobstering, pizza delivering, and logging. He has written 4 nonfiction books, where he goes from talking about living life right out of college to how he dropped everything in his life to learn how to surf. Heller's debut fiction novel, The Dogstars, is a national bestseller, a Hudson Booksellers Top Fiction of the Year, and has been published in 18 different languages. Since then, he has written The Painter, which has been deemed masterful in Publishers Weekly, and has also won many awards, as well as Celine, which is an Entertainment Weekly top 10 most anticipated book of 2017. I can tell you that from reading all of Peter Heller's works in the span of just a semester, I have seen him grow as an author throughout his writing. I've seen how passionate he is about what he loves and what he does, and that has inspired me to find that enjoyment and fire in my own life. I look forward to following Mr. Heller's career as he inspires others throughout his honest, thoughtful, and charismatic works. So please help me in welcoming our 2018 Symposium author, Mr. Peter Heller.
It's so cool to be here. Thank you, Ellie. That was just such a lovely introduction. And thanks, Meg. Thanks to David Hild for reaching out and bringing me to the school. Thanks to the school for having me. And thank you guys for coming to listen and to reading some of the stuff that I've written. I'm going to read to you guys a little bit. Sorry, because I like to do it. And I think it's cool for you to hear nonfiction and especially fiction in the voice of the writer, because in the fiction, which I'm going to read to you, you'll get to hear the voice of Hig that I heard when I wrote him down. So bear with me. I'm going to start with nonfiction, and I'm going to start with a reading from Kook, which is on my phone, I think. Kook was a memoir about a guy, me, in the middle of his life who decided that he just thought surfing was the greatest thing after 1 week, and getting pretty much hammered the whole time and getting threatened by expert surfers to get out of the water, which wasn't that fun. But I thought surfing was so cool after 1 week that I did what I've been doing my whole life with publishing and writing. I thought, how can I get a publisher to finance a surf trip in an old VW Vanagon down the whole coast of Mexico? And could I, in the middle of my life, ride a big, fast, hollow wave like you see on TV in 6 months? Could I learn to do that? So I did find a gullible publisher. I invited my girlfriend, who's here, now my wife, Kim. We got married on the trip. I think she married me because she was basically traumatized by waves and didn't know what else to do. And so I wrote this memoir when I came back called Kook. And Kook is the term that expert surfers call beginners when they see them flailing around and getting in the way on the wave. And how I heard it the first time was my very first morning on Huntington Beach Pier. Listen, if you guys ever want to learn to surf, do not go out to Huntington Beach Pier on your first day. I didn't know that was a bad idea. But I had like these world-class surfers. This guy paddled up to me and said, "You effing kook, get the F out of the water before I effing kill your ass now." And he said that about, a couple times. I survived. So here's one page from Kook. Why we need stuff like surfing. We are not a graceful species. We spend all day falling forward from one precarious step to the next. We bump, bumble, and teeter. Think of John and Jane every human, walking down the street, chatting, sipping their Starbucks on the way to work. Think of them swiveling their bulbous heads on the stalks of their necks to look at something that catches an eye, their raw, hairless faces like blunt semaphores in the sunlight. Think of them stepping off a curb, wading to the other side, lifting their knees with some effort to gain the sidewalk, jostling every human whose head is craned into her cell phone as she passes. Now think of a single minnow, Minnie. She turns like a bead of mercury. She is as at home in her firmament as an element. Water gains definition by her fluidity. Lightning can teach her nothing about moving from one place to another. When she idles, holding herself steady with a minute wavering of her tail, an invisible flutter of a fin. She is incomparable in her stillness, as poised with the potential for explosive movement as any loaded gun. She looks like she is thinking. That's just one minnow. Look into the water off any seaside dock, and if the water is green and clear, you see 100 minnows, 1,000, moving in liquid concert like a single thought, flashing back sunlight in a sudden turn as precise and effortless as a single swallow, as synchronized as a wave of wind moving through tall grass. That's minnows. We haven't even mentioned a big cat flowing down through rocks. Don't get me started. We need surf, or dance, or yoga, because it reconnects us with our animal bodies. For a little while, we practice moving through the world with rhythm, with an intention of efficiency and power. Without it, we become just a bunch of walking heads. So, that's nonfiction. Now, I'm going to read you guys from the Dogstars. This is Jasper. Meet Jasper. The Dogstars is my first novel, and I'm going to tell you guys, in this little talk, I'm going to tell you how I got from writing magazine articles and stuff about surfing to fiction and novels. The Dogstars is about two guys who live at a little country airport north of Denver 9 years after a super flu has killed almost everybody on the planet. And our hero, Hig, lives with his old dog, who's a blue heeler. This is an Australian Shepherd, but we do the best we can. He lives with his old dog, Jasper, at the airport, and they have an old Cessna airplane, and every day he and Jasper get in the plane, and they fly a patrol looking for survivors. So they share the airport with a mean gun nut named Bangley, who kind of defends the place, and that's how the thing begins. It begins sort of like one of those, apocalyptic movies that you love to watch on TV, right? But I'm going to read you just a page about Jasper getting older and trying to get up in the airplane. Jasper used to be able to jump up into the cockpit. Now he can't. In the 4th year, we had an argument. I took out the front passenger seat for weight and cargo and put down a flannel sleeping bag with a pattern of a man shooting a pheasant over and over, his dog on 3 legs, pointing out in front. Not sure why I didn't do that before. The dog doesn't look like Jasper still. I carried him, lay him on the pattern of the man and the dog. You and me in another life, I tell him. He likes to fly. Anyway, I wouldn't leave him alone with Bangley. When I took out the seat, he got depressed. He couldn't sit up and look out. He knows to stay back of the rudder pedals. Once in a shear, he skidded into them and nearly killed us. After that, I fashioned like a 4-inch wood fence, but scrapped it after he inspected it and jumped out of the plane and refused to fly. No shit. It insulted him, the whole thing. I used to worry about the engine roar and prop blast. I wear the headset even though there is no one to talk to on the radio because it dampens the noise, but I worried about Jasper, even tried to make him his own hearing protector, this helmet kind of thing. It wouldn't stay on, probably why he's mostly deaf now. When I picked up oil, etc., I moved the quilt to the top of the stack so he could look out. See, I said, at least it's good half the time, better than most of us can expect. He still thought it was lame, I could tell. Not half as excited. So now when I'm not picking up, just flying, which is most of the time, I bolt the seat back in. It just takes a few minutes, not like we don't have time. First time he sat up straight again and glanced at me like, what took you so long? Then looked forward, real serious, brow furrowed like a co-pilot. His mood it lifted, as palpable as weather. He's getting old. I don't count the years. I don't multiply by 7. They bred dogs for everything else, even diving for fish. Why didn't they breed them to live longer, to live as long as a man? So that's the end of the reading. I'm going to read you guys a page later, if you're good. But I want to tell you about how I sort of got here, because it's kind of not the route that most writers take, I don't think. My dad read poetry to me when I was little. How many of you hate poetry? Okay, wait. Hold on. Okay, this is like an honor system. So all the adults in the room, the teachers and administrators, everything, you have to close your eyes, okay? This is like truly an honor. Do not open your eyes. I will see, and you will be penalized and suspended without pay. Okay, now, their eyes are closed, guys. Okay, how many people really hate poetry? Wow! Okay, put your hands down quick. Put your hands down. Okay. How many people, oh no, I can't do that now. I can't because then they'll know, right? They'll subtract. Okay, we won't do that. We won't ask how many people love it. Okay, I get it. Are we good? I know there's somebody in here who loves poetry. That's cool. We're like brothers and sisters. I love poetry. My dad read me poetry when I was little. When I was 6 years old, he started me on E.E. Cummings. Do you guys have any idea who he is? No. Yeah, no punctuation, all lowercase. And a lot of it's kind of bawdy, you know? So my dad reading me that was like kind of grounds for social services to come in and take me away. But I didn't understand the poems, luckily, but I loved the sound of them. Do you want to hear one? Okay. Defunct. Do you know what defunct means? Defunct means kind of finished, right? Wrecked, dead. Okay. Buffalo Bill's defunct, who used to ride a silver, water-smooth stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons. That means clay pigeons, just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? Dad read that to me when I was 6. I mean, I like blinked up at him like, oh, gee, that's cool. I didn't know what it meant, but I really loved the sound of it. And then he would read me like, you know, Yeats and stuff when I was just this little tiny guy. And I didn't really get it, but I loved the sound, the music of the language. I really loved it. And then when I was 11, you guys are much older than that, but when I was 11, I walked into my little school library in New York City in Brooklyn Heights, and the librarian, Annie Bosworth, she was English, and I had a crush on her. Like I would have married her that day, except I was 11. And I had a crush on her because just the way she said my name. She said, Peter. Oh, are you looking for something to read? And I was like, uh-huh. Dun, 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 dun. And she said, come over here. So she led me over to the fiction shelf, and she pulled down this slim little volume of short stories called In Our Time. And it's by this guy you probably never heard of called Ernest Hemingway. I took it home, and I cracked it open. Now, I'm living in New York City. You got to imagine a kid. I'm not like you guys. I didn't grow up with lots of trees and stuff, right? I cracked that open, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're mostly about this kid, Nick Adams, up in Upper Michigan in the woods. And I thought, I want to do this. I want to hop off a slow-moving freight train in the woods of Upper Michigan and walk with a rucksack through tall grass and camp by this river. And I want to make cowboy coffee. I didn't know what cowboy coffee was, but I thought it sounded awesome. And I want to not burn my tongue, just the way Nick did not burn his tongue. I wanted to, like in the end of something, this story of this beautiful breakup story. I really recommend you guys read this story before you become an adult. Okay? It's called The End of Something. I wanted to have a girlfriend that could row and fish like a man. How cool is that? And then I wanted to break up with her because Nick did. I don't know why he did that, because she was pretty awesome. But mostly what I wanted to do was write like this guy, Ernest Hemingway. The prose came through like my skin, straight into my heart. Okay, honestly, have you guys like ever had that feeling where you've read something so beautiful that it just goes like straight to your heart? No? God, should I take a show of hands again? No, I'm not going to do that. Embarrass you guys. But that was the experience I had, and I thought, I want to do this. I want to write like this guy. So I started doing everything I could think of to become a great American writer when I was 11. I heard that this guy, Jack London, this great novelist, used to take words that he didn't know, and he put them on cards, and he put them on his wall. So I did that. I wrote words that I didn't know, and I put them on my wall. And I did stuff like read the dictionary. Can you imagine? I copied out poems and paragraphs from short stories that I loved. I did all that stuff. Then I got into a good college. I became an English major. I took biology and botany so that I'd know the names of the trees when I was describing them. I was really trying hard, and then I got out of college, and guess what? I discovered that you're not just going to get a paycheck writing poetry, right, or short stories, that you have to kind of piece it together. So I was a kayaker. I loved kayaking. I learned to kayak in college, and I was a river guide. So I came out to Colorado, and I started teaching kayaking, and I started delivering pizza, which I was really good at because stop signs meant nothing, and I got the pizza there on time. And I was writing poetry whenever I could in my room. And one day a friend said, we went skiing, and he was a ski instructor, would always get me a free pass because I was always half broke. And we were skiing, and he said, hey, why don't you combine your interests, dude? I mean, you kayak this crazy stuff all the time, and you spend all these hours writing poetry. Why don't you write for Outside Magazine about kayaking? Do you guys know, have you ever seen Outside Magazine? Okay, so being young and dumb, just saying, I thought I didn't know what I couldn't do, and I went to the magazine store, and I picked an Outside Magazine up, and I looked, in the front of the magazines where they have all the editors listed? It's called the masthead. And I thought, okay, I'm going to call up an editor. I'm just going to cold call an editor, but I better pick someone who sounds nice. Because some of the names on the masthead sounded really mean, like, John Crookshank. And I just knew that he would turn me down. But there was this name on there, Laura Honhold, senior editor. Doesn't that sound nice? Honhold. I can't even spell it. It has like 3 H's in it. And I called up the 800 number for Outside Magazine. I got the main desk, and I said, Laura Honhold, please. I'm a young guy, right? I'm like, Laura Honhold. She said, just a sec. And then, Laura here. And then I was like, oh my God, she's answering. So I started talking really fast. I said, hey, I live in Colorado. I'm a writer. I just had a story published in Harper's, which was sort of true. And it was this little reprint of a college story. So it was true. It was in there, but it was tiny. And I said, I can paddle kayak class 5, and I want you to send me to Tibet on this expedition to the Tibetan Plateau to kayak this river that's never been done before. There was this long pause, and then she said, you know what? I'm going to take a chance on you. We've heard about this expedition. We'd like to cover it, but we don't have a kayaker that can kayak class 5. And I'm going to pay half your expenses, and if you write a good story, I'll pay your other half when you get back, and I'll buy the story. So I was like, yes, because I needed a new paddle. My old paddle was all duct taped together. And I went. And what I realized later was that they sent me because I was dispensable. All their other writers, they really didn't want them to perish. They liked them. They didn't know me, so they didn't care. And I went, and we were doing a training run, and what the deal was I was one of 3 kayakers, and then there were rafts, right? You guys know what whitewater river rafts look like, right? And it was all river running professionals. And except for this one couple who was on their honeymoon, but they were super athletic, they were canoers, and they came. So we decided to do a practice run, and we're in western Sichuan with the Himalayas behind us on the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, and we decided to put on this little river. It was a really sweet-looking little river, class 4, no big deal. And as we were getting our gear together to put into the river, you could see that there was a big storm in the Himalayas, like black sky, and there was lightning. And the river was starting to rise, and it was starting to get kind of raucous. And then it was starting to look like a flooded river. And when we put on, I remember I was warming up, and I was surfing a wave back and forth, a standing wave. And then I peeled off the wave, and I came around the corner, and I saw one of the rafts doing cartwheels beneath the ledge with no one in it. And that is not what you want to see when you're a kayaker. So I paddled as hard as I could around the corner, and I saw a helmet in the water. And I went for the helmet, and I gave the guy my stern, and he reached for it. We hit a big wave, and he couldn't grab it. and I saw we were being pushed into the left bank into a log jam. A log jam is the worst thing in a river because it's like a sieve, right? The water goes through, but everything else sticks. And I hit the shore, and just before I hit the shore, I saw that there was another helmet already stuck in the log jam. And then I saw my guy's helmet hit his, and I got out of the boat as fast as I could, scrambled over the logs, and grabbed the guy's life jacket, the guy who just tried to grab my boat. And right behind me was the other kayaker, Scott, and we grabbed his life jacket. We pulled him off the logs and over the logs and to the bank, and he was still alive. He was one of the Chinese guides, and we lay him down. We ran back for the second kayak. We grabbed him, we pulled, and he was stuck, and the river was rising. And we tried to get him out. And we looked around, and it was Dave. It was the guy that was on his honeymoon. And we took a rope, and we put it around his waist, and we put it through a pulley system that's very, very strong. And we pulled, and we couldn't get him out. And so we tried to hold his head out of the water, but the water rose over his head, and he died right in our arms. So we had to paddle across the river and go tell his wife, who was on his honeymoon, that he was dead. So the next day, they cremated him, and she flew out. And the second day after that, we all gathered by the river, and we were stunned with grief. And we sang Amazing Grace, which is kind of what you do if you can't think of anything else. And I had a book of Chinese poetry, Tang Dynasty, from the 9th and 8th century poems that I brought with me. I thought, on my first assignment, I'll bring a book of poems with me from the place to get the heart of the place. And I read one from that book. And then we dispersed, and we spent the next couple of weeks just driving around the grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau in shock. And there were people living up there in yurts and herding yak with horses and living like Sioux on the Great Plains. It was really surreal. And I got back, and I called up Laura Honhold, and I said, "Hey, Laura, I'm sorry, I can't write your story." And she said, "Why? What happened?" And I said, "Well," and I started telling her. And 45 minutes, this is a busy editor, 45 minutes later, I was just venting. I know that I was traumatized. And she said, you could have heard a pin drop during the whole thing. And then she said, "You go write that." And I wrote it, and it was their submission for the National Magazine Award that year. And it was an odd way to start in journalism. And I knew that if I didn't paddle something else right away, that I would never kayak again. It's like you got to get back in the saddle. As soon as something bad happens, you got to get back in. And so I took an assignment, believe it or not, from Playboy. And you think of that as kind of an inside magazine, right? Because Hugh Hefner, he just spent all his time in a bathrobe. I don't think he ever went outside once. But they actually were interested in this idea of this Russian Kiwi expedition. Kiwis are from New Zealand. And it was an expedition to go do this crazy river in just north of Afghanistan and Tajikistan, in the high Pamir Mountains. And the last expedition that had tried it 2 years before lost 5 of their 11 guys. So 5 out of the 11 people died on this trip. And so we went with this expedition, and this guy Roy and I, he was a New Zealand kid, were the kayakers, and we're supposed to kayak out front in this giant water. Like, if you've seen videos of huge waves, we were supposed to kayak out front and find the lines. And the cool thing is that Russians and Kiwis are like oil and water. I mean, try taking an expedition with these two teams where when you got to a hard rapid, looking down into the canyon, the Russians would squat and they'd get all grim and they'd start chain smoking and drinking vodka. And it was like the weight of history. And meanwhile, the Kiwis are running up and down their bank going, "She'll be right. Oh, I see a line. No worries, mate. No problem." And the guy that had to navigate between the two teams, Vanya, he was the translator. He learned all his English from Frank Zappa records. So he could sing all the Frank Zappa songs. And one night, he pulled me aside and he said, "Pete, last year I was guiding expedition in same area in mountains, a geology expedition. And next drainage over the ridge was international team of scientists looking for Yeti, led by French scientists. So one night, Pete, I took Swiss Army saw, and I took plywood from raft deck, and I cut out foot. And then I put handle on it. And then you know how like creek come down through rocks and snowbank? I went along and I made tracks. And Pete, next day they found the tracks. And it made international headlines. And you can look it up. In 1990, they found Yeti in the Pamirs. And he said, but only one problem, Pete, was all left feet. So I guess they didn't notice. But anyway, so this trip was like the perfect antidote to the one before. And it launched this whole career, writing adventure stories for magazines, like, National Geographic and all that. And after doing a few of those, a few years of those, I realized as I traveled that the ecosphere was unraveling. It was very clear to me that the environment was having a very tough time, especially the oceans. And I thought, you can't just write adventure. You have to take some responsibility. You have to write about the environment. So I started writing about the environmental stories. I went with Sea Shepherd, the Whale Wars guys, you probably know about this. So I went with those. I wrote a book about them. It was crazy. I came back from that. I got invited to go to the Cove. Do you know about the Cove where they killed the dolphins? So I got invited to write about that. I paddled out for Men's Journal into the inlet, and it was paint red with blood, and they'd already killed like 50 pilot whales. They'd spiked them to death. There was a net across the inlet, and there were 12 little pilot whales left. And they were freaked out by us because we went out and we formed a circle on our surfboards. And we formed a prayer circle, a surfer circle, which is how you say goodbye to a surfer. And after a while, they kind of realized as we were praying for them, they started flowing along the nets and relaxing. And the little baby spy hopped and put her head out of the water to look at us. And I realized that they would all be dead within an hour, spiked to death. And I came back from that experience, and my wife, Kim, who's here, she would go to sleep, and I would lie beside her, and I would just cry. I cried for weeks, like a month. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen. I didn't understand, why are we killing these animals? They're totally self-aware. They don't need to eat dolphin or pilot whale. And what I got from that was, hey, what these little pilot whales were trying to tell me was, you have a responsibility to speak for the ones who cannot speak for themselves. We're in the middle of the sixth great mass extinction. A lot of stuff's happening. You need to take responsibility. And so I wrote more environmental stories. And then a few years ago, I thought, hey, it's time. I've been wanting to write novels my whole life since I was a little kid. Let's write a novel. So I called up my friend Carlton Cuse, who was the producer of Lost. Did you guys ever see that show, Lost? Do you know what it is? So it was a big show on TV. And my best friend from high school, Carlton, was the producer and showrunner. He ran the show and the writers and everything. And he had worked with a lot of novelists. So I called him up and I said, hey, Carlton, do you know of any novelists that start with a first line and have no idea what they're writing and just start writing? Because I didn't know if that was legal. I didn't want to know, since I'd written all these magazine stories and all this nonfiction, I always knew what the ending was going to be, right? I always knew what was going to happen next because it happened. I wanted to have the experience of running a river, like when you run a river, it's never been run before. I wanted to have the experience of being shocked and surprised. Come around a bend. Is it a waterfall, a cougar drinking, just some swallows? I wanted that experience. So I asked him, and he didn't hesitate. He said, hey, I work with Stephen King. He often starts with the first line. The first line is just a voice, and the voice is a character, right? The character's in a place. There's a situation, because there's always a situation any place you go. And he writes into the story. And he said Elmore Leonard, this guy, he writes crime novels from South Florida. He just died, but he said he often starts with the first line, has no clue. So I sat down, and my first line was, I keep the beast running. I keep the 100 low lead on tap. That's aviation fuel. And then a few lines later, my name is Hig, one name, Big Hig, if you need another. If I ever woke up crying in the middle of a dream, and I'm not saying I did, it's because the trout are gone, every one. And as soon as I wrote that, I was like, oh, I'm listening. Keep talking. And it was almost like I would go to the coffee shop every morning, and I would say to myself, don't think, just listen. And it was almost like this guy Hig was sitting across the campfire from me telling me what happened to him a few years before. It was like we were sitting there and the wind's blowing the flames around and he's talking to me. It was the most thrilling thing that I ever did. And that's sort of how, I got launched in fiction. I wrote the novel in like 7 months, and then I dove into the next one, and that's how we started. And it's been really fun. And I'm going to take a bunch of questions now before I inflict on you any more reading. So don't be shy. I know you're not. I can tell. Yeah, we don't even need the mic if you don't. But we can. Yeah, sure.
If you had one theme song to describe your life, what would it be?
That's good. And not like I did it my way or something corny like that.
That's a good
I know what it would be. I think of that. Did you guys ever see the movie Deliverance?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Well, there's a scene in there where there's a kid on a front porch of a cabin. He's like a bald-headed kid, and he doesn't look like he's all there, but he's playing the banjo, and he's going, din, 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 din. That would be my theme song. Because we can't take ourselves too seriously.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi. Would you ever turn any of your movies into any of your books into a movie?
Man, I'm glad you asked that. Because so the Dogstars was bought by a movie studio called Constantine Films. And they made all these old spaghetti westerns that you guys probably never seen called like Good, Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time. They made all these old Clint Eastwood westerns, but they also made the Resident Evil movies. Do you know what those are? They're zombie movies, right? So they're the perfect DNA for the Dogstars, because Dogstars is sort of a western, but it's also post-apocalyptic, so perfect. So they bought it. They have a director. They have a wonderful script. And guess who wants to play Hig? Channing Tatum. Yep. And I don't know. I can't imagine Hig dancing half naked, but I'm trying. Because I don't know if Channing Tatum can pull it off. The Painter is another novel, and that has a wonderful script written by the guy who wrote The Fighter, which is a cool movie. It's got a great director by the woman who made the movie Blackfish, and we'll see what happens there. And then Celine is now being, somebody wants to buy Celine. I'm not going to tell you which network, but they want to buy it for a TV show. So that's kind of cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
Out of your books you've wrote, which one is your favorite?
Yeah, so somebody asked me that earlier, and I was like, oh, it's like asking like who your favorite kid is, right? But okay, right now my favorite is the Dogstars, because I just love Jasper so much, and Jasper's he's like one of the main characters. But I just finished a novel called The River, and it's about two guys in a canoe way up by Hudson Bay, and I really, really love it, so that's a contender. But I still think you should buy them all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What has inspired you the most to write your books? And also, can you sign my book?
I love that. Of course I'll sign your book. What's inspired me? You know what? So here's something. I want to tell you about French novelists. Can I tell you guys about French novelists? We went to France last year, a year ago, September. Kim and I went to France because for some reason the books have been translated into French, and the French love these books. And I think they love the American West, especially because they don't have a lot of big open spaces in France. It's been lived in for thousands of years, and they feel a little bit claustrophobic over there, I think, maybe, why they drink so much red wine. So in France, there's this whole culture of writing. In France, novelists are like rock stars. I'm just saying. I mean, novelists walk down the street and people go, oh, wow, and they run up and they get autographs and stuff. I mean, French really love their literature. And the whole mystique and mythos of the French novelist is that they have to suffer. So French novelists, they write a novel, and then they don't write anything for like 5 years because they have to suffer so much. and they go through like their marriages break up, and they become alcoholics, and they lose everything, they drink, and they suffer, and then they get inspired, and then they write the next novel. And that's how French are. So when the portrait photographer was taking my photograph at the French publishers, I went like this, because I'm an American writer. I went, right? He said, no, go like this. I was like, you're kidding. He goes, no, you go like this. I was like, no, we don't do that in America. We don't suffer like that. I don't believe in that. So what I'm trying to say is that inspiration, I go to work every day and I think of it as making furniture, really, or I think of it more like an athletic enterprise. I train every day. I write every day. I read the way athletes lift weights and do cross-training. I eat well so that I have good energy in the morning. I always exercise. I exercise hard in the afternoon so that I'm energized and fresh the next morning to write. Everything sort of is aimed for those few hours when I write my 1,000 words. And so it's not so much about inspiration as discipline and hard work. And I try and stay humble, because if I think, I'm going to be inspired and, this thing has to be great, I'm never going to do anything. But if I think, okay, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to put on my apron, I'm going to take some wood, I'm going to shape it, I'm going to put it together, and I'm going to do the best I can, then something usually happens. So hate to keep you standing there this whole time, but if I do get inspired, I want to answer your question seriously, because it's a really good question. If I do get inspired, it's when I'm knee-deep in a stream in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm fly fishing, and it's evening, and I see a kingfisher or an osprey fly over, and I feel so connected to the evening and to the land and to the animals and to the sounds and the smells of the water. I feel so moved that I feel it's almost like something divine is happening, and that's where I get my nurture. So thanks for the question. And I'll sign your book after.
Okay.
Thank you.
The post-apocalyptic genre, which is, I believe, what your Dogstars book is about, I actually talked about this in my advisory group a few days ago. Would you consider the Dogstars a break away from the typical post-apocalyptic genre, which nowadays usually either have a teenage main character or an authoritarian government, or both?
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I don't have an authoritarian government because there's no government, and I don't have a teenager. That would be good. I'm not saying that would be bad. But it is different, I think. There's no zombies. Everybody is pretty much a good person. No, that's not true. There's some really bad people in Dogstars. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's different. Well, Hig is different because, okay, look, how many post-apocalyptic stories have a hero that loves poetry? Look, you guys, get with it. You guys got to start reading some poetry. It's really beautiful. So thanks for the question. Yeah, appreciate it.
How many more books do you expect to write?
How long can I live? So here's the wonderful thing about life, is that I might walk out that door and get hit by a falling icicle or a crazy crow, and I might keel over, and this will be the last talk that I ever give, and you guys will remember it, like you'll tell your kids, oh, we saw the last talk Peter Eller ever gave. That might happen, and that's kind of cool. That's what gives life its spiciness, we say. So I don't know. I write like a book I've been writing like a book a year, so let's multiply that out. And we won't divide by 7 like dog years. But I really, I'm an old guy now, right? And so I don't have a lot of time either way, so I got to write as fast as I can.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
That it? Okay, are we about out of here? So I got to say one last thing. And this is kind of cool. When I finished the Dogstars, that first novel I told you about, I got to the end, and Hig was lying under the stars where he likes to sleep, and he makes up constellations because he can't remember them all. He doesn't have a star map. And he made one for Jasper. And then he says, in the very last lines of the book, he said, my favorite poem is written by Li Shang Yin, It was written in the 9th century in the Tang Dynasty in China, and it goes, "When will I be home?" And it was the same poem that I read for David by the river when he died, 25 years before. It came in out of the dark, out of the universe, and I wrote it down as the last line of this novel 25 years later, and it goes like this: "When will I be home? I don't know. In the mountains, in the rainy night, the autumn lake is flooded. One day, we will be back together again. We will sit in the candlelight of the west window, and I will tell you how I remembered you tonight on the stormy mountain." Thanks for coming.